Hi Essex, it's Miss Ahad here with your reading lesson. This week in reading, we are focusing on a novel called The Explorer by Katherine Rundell. This book will intertwine nicely with our geography unit as we're looking at the Amazon rainforest. I'm just going to share my screen with you all so you can have a look at my screen and then we can do the vocabulary and read our novel together. So firstly, this is a picture of the book. Unfortunately, you can't see it in real life. However, virtually is great. So it's called The Explorer by Katherine Rundell. And this book is about 4 children who must survive in the Amazon after their plane crashes. And they are on their way back to England from Manaus when the plane they are on crashes and the pilot dies upon landing. A pilot is someone who has the necessary skills and qualifications to fly a plane. They have had a lot of training and have been to university to help them understand how to fly a plane. Okay, so we are now going to move on to our vocabulary, and this will focus on 8 different words which you will use in sentences. Okay, so our first word, Miss Ahad's going to do the word first, and then you'll repeat after me. So my turn, grimace. Your turn. This is a facial expression which is often ugly and it indicates pain or disapproval. Grimace. In a sentence, we could use the word like this. For example, Miss Ahad stopped and made a grimace, as if she was expecting something unpleasant. What could it be? Our next word is swerved, and that is a verb, swerved. And this means to turn aside abruptly in movement or direction. In this image here, you can see the car, this black Audi car here is swerving this other vehicle so that they don't have a car accident. So you could say the car swerved onto the side of the road. Our next word is deserted, and that means something that is untenanted, and that means that no one is living there. Without inhabitants, there's nobody habitating in this place. There's nobody living here. So you could say the house down the old street was deserted. Nobody was living there. Our next word is lurched. And this is a verb which means to sway abruptly. So you could say, for example, the bus lurched forward and the passengers fell to one side. Lurched. We then have another adjective which is infinitesimal. Infinitesimal. Your turn. And this means something really small. We could say in a sentence, many of our problems are infinitesimal, so we shouldn't have to worry about them all. Our next word is squinted, and Miss Ahad's doing the action right here. It's a verb, and that means to look with your eyes at something closely. So in this image, this woman is looking at her phone, I think, or a notepad closely. You could also say maybe in a sentence, the boy was squinting at the back of the room because he couldn't see the whiteboard. I want to see you try and do the action of squinting. So squint. Squinted. And then our final word is a frown. And here, frown means to look displeased or to have an angry look. And this is Miss Ahad's frown. You could say Miss Ahad frowned because she wasn't seeing all her students. Frown. Now, we have gone through our words together. Let's go through them one more time. Okay, so our first word is grimace. Our next word is swerved. Swerved. We then have deserted. Deserted. And have lurched. Lurched. We have infinitesimal. Infinitesimal. I want to hear that nice and loud. Infinitesimal. We have squinted. Squinted. And it's in the past tense here. Squinted. And then lastly, frown. Frown. Everyone show me that frown. 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 Well done, Year 6. Nice and loud. Keep that up. We are now going on to read our chapter. So I'm just going to share my visualizer screen here, and you should be able to see my chapter here. I'm going to read the chapter, but I'd like you all to follow along the text with me with your pencil or your ruler. So Miss Ahad's using her ruler here. Flight. Like a man-made magic wish, the aeroplane began to rise. The boy sitting in the cockpit gripped his seat and held his breath as the plane climbed into the arms of the sky. Fred's jaw was set with concentration and his fingers twitched, following the movements of the pilot beside him, joystick, throttle. The aeroplane vibrated as it flew faster into the setting sun, following the swerve of the Amazon River below them. Fred could see the reflection of the six-seater plane, a spot of the black on the vast sweep of blue as it sped towards Manaus, the city on the water. Manaus is in Brazil, for those of you who don't know. He brushed his hair out of his eyes and pressed his forehead against the window. Behind Fred sat a girl and her little brother. They had the same slanted eyebrows and the same brown skin, the same long eyelashes. The girl had been shy, hugging her parents until the last possible moment at the airfield. Now she was staring down at the water, singing under her breath, her brother trying to eat his seatbelt. In the next row, on her own, sat a pale girl with blonde hair down her waist. Her blouse had a neck ruffle that came up to her chin, and she kept tugging it down and grimacing. She was determinedly not looking out of the window. I wonder why. That means she actively did not want to look out the window. She was trying to avoid it. The airfield they had just left had been dusty and almost deserted, left alone, just a strip of tarmac under the ferocious Brazilian sun. Fred's cousin had insisted that he wear his school uniform and cricket jumper, and now, inside of the airless cabin, he felt like he was being inside the hot, airless cabin. He felt like he was being gently cooked inside his own skin. The engine gave a whine, and the pilot frowned and tapped the joystick. He was old and shouldery, with brisk nostril hair and a grey wax moustache, which seemed to reject the usual laws of gravity. He touched the throttle and the plane soared upwards, higher into the clouds. It was almost dark when Fred began to worry. The pilot began to belch first quietly, then violently and repeatedly. His hand jerked and the plane dipped suddenly to the left. Someone screamed behind Fred. The plane lurched away from the river and over the canopy. The pilot grunted, gasped, and wound back the throttle, slowing the engine. He gave a cough that sounded like a choke. Fred stared at the man. He was turning the same shade of grey as his moustache. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked. "Is there something I can do?" Fighting for his breath, the pilot shook his head. He reached over the control panel and cut the engine. The roar ceased. The noise of the plane dipped downwards. The trees rose up. I wonder what's happening here. "What's happening?" asked the blonde girl sharply. "What's he doing? Make him stop." The little boy in the back began to shriek. The pilot gasped. Fred's wrist hard for a single moment. The pilot grasped Fred's wrist hard for a single moment. Then his head slumped against the dashboard. And the sky, which had seconds before seemed so reliable, gave away. The green dark. Fred wondered as he ran if he was dead, but he thought dead would surely be quieter. The roar of the flames and his own blood vibrated through his hands and feet. The night was black. He tried to heave in breath, to shout for help as he ran, but his throat was too dry and ashy to yell. He jabbed his finger into the back of his tongue to summon up spit. "Is anybody there? Help!" "Fire!" he shouted. The fire called back in response. A tree behind him sent up a fountain of flames. There was a rumble of thunder. Nothing else replied. A burning branch cracked, spat red, and fell in a cascade of sparks. Fred leapt away, stumbling backwards into the dark and smacking his head against something hard. The branch landed exactly where he'd been standing seconds before. He swallowed the bough that rose in his throat and began to run again, faster and wilder. Something landed on his chin and he ducked, smacking his face. But it was only a raindrop. The rain came suddenly and hard. It turned the soot and sweat on his hands to something like tar, but it began to quench like fire. Fred slowed his run to a jog, then to a stop. Gasping, choking, he looked back at the way he had come. The little aeroplane was in the trees. It was smoking, sending up clouds of white and grey into the night sky. He stared around, dizzy and desperate, but he couldn't see or hear a single human, only the fern-like plants growing around his ankles and the trees wrenching hundreds of feet up into the sky, and he panicked, dive and shriek of and the panic dive and shriek of birds. He shook his head hard, trying to banish the shipwreck roar in his ears. The hair on his arms was singed and smelled of eggs. He put his hand to his forehead. His eyebrows had charred and part of it came away on his fingers. He wiped his eyebrows on the sleeve of his shirt. Fred looked down at himself. One leg of his trouser was ripped all the way up to the pocket, but none of his bones felt broken. There was a vicious pain, though, in his back and neck, and it made his arms and legs feel far off and foreign. A voice came suddenly from the dark. "Who's there? Get away from us!" Fred spun round, his ears still buzzing. He grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it in the direction of the voice. He ducked behind a tree and crouched on his haunches, poised to jump or run. His heart sounded like a one-man band. He tried not to exhale, which means he tried not to breathe in. And why do you think he's not trying to breathe in? Think about the atmosphere that they're describing here. The voice said, "For God's sake, don't throw things." So we've just read the chapter, and I wonder what has happened here. Has the plane crashed? Has it not? Has Fred been left in a terrible situation? Let's find out. So before we carry on, we've just read our text. I want you to just jot some ideas of what you have taken from this text. Maybe how the atmosphere was described. Maybe how the characters were feeling. Was it that the blonde girl was feeling very scared? We know the main character first. We know Fred is one of the main characters. But did we find out about anyone else? I guess we might have to carry on reading. So it's up to our class teachers to carry on reading the novel so we can find out more about the characters. So my activity for you is to look at, just like we do in class, we've practiced the vocabulary together. Miss Ahad had her turn, you had your turn, and now you are going to match up the vocabulary to the other half of the sentence. So for example, let's look at an example. I'm just going to turn to my visualizer once more so I can write that down. So my first sentence is, people who find themselves squinting should do what? Well, I know squinting means that you're looking at something closely or partially because your eyes are doing what? Well, I know that if I was to squint, my eyes will be looking partly closed. So people who find themselves squinting, I think, should get their eyes tested. So I'm going to write that down. Get there, it's this there because eyes belong to them. So that's my sentence. People who find themselves squinting should get their eyes tested. You could also write squinting, but have it in the past tense. So it could be, he squinted as he looked at the whiteboard. That could be another sentence. If you finish, maybe you can write your own and send them into your class teachers. I know they're looking forward to reading your sentences. And then my next sentence I have here is, a grimace crossed the basketball player's face when, firstly, Miss Ahad needs to think, what does grimace mean? Well, I know it's a facial expression which often is ugly and it indicates pain or disapproval. So I know in this instance, a basketball hitting someone's face will be painful. So I could say a grimace crossed the basketball player's face when he hit his leg. So when the basketball player hit his leg, a grimace crossed his face because he was in pain. And that is what I'm going to suggest. So year 6. What I'm going to ask you to do now, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to ask you to start that activity. You're going to finish the sentence on that vocab sheet. If you want, you can write the sentences out. If you can print it off, that's fine. You need to complete that activity. If you finished, maybe try and write some sentences of your own. And I cannot wait to read them all. Have fun reading. Bye.